The town would remember the scream, but no one would remember the truth, except the one who couldn't speak it. What began as devotion twisted into something darker, and from that darkness rose a kind of redemption no human hand could have written. Don't scroll past this one, hit like, subscribe, and share where you're watching as we uncover the story they tried to forget. Langston Hale, a 34-year-old black man with a smooth voice and eyes that had forgotten how to rest, guided his mother's wheelchair along the narrow path leading to Black Ridge Cliff. The dawn wind blew sharp, slicing through the fog that curled around the trees. He wore a long charcoal overcoat, gloves tight on his hands, and shoes polished enough to mirror the cold light of morning. From afar, he looked like a devoted son taking his elderly mother out for fresh air. Up close, his posture told a different story. Tense shoulders, jaw locked, breath steady like someone walking toward an ending he'd already decided. Coraline Hale, frail and delicate, sat wrapped in a soft blanket, her face the color of warm bronze dulled by age. Her eyes, though tired, carried that unbreakable calm of a woman who had known storms before. "It's so quiet up here," she said softly, almost like the world's still sleeping. Langston forced a smile. "Yeah, Ma, peaceful." The word felt foreign in his mouth. He hadn't felt peace in years, not since the debts, not since the arguments with the bank, not since the last medical bill he couldn't pay. His life had turned into a checklist of failures, and every time he looked at his mother's trembling hands, he saw the price of them. He pushed harder, the wheels crunching against gravel, small stones tumbling off the path and vanishing into the mist below. "You sure you want to go all the way up?" he asked, pretending to care. Coraline smiled faintly. "You always rush things, baby. What's up there that you can't find right here?" Her voice carried warmth, the kind that used to soothe him when nightmares kept him awake as a child. But now it only stung. He said nothing. She didn't know that the house she'd raised him in, the one filled with his father's old blues records and faded family photos, was gone, sold to cover his debts. The papers were already signed. He'd told himself she wouldn't need it anymore. "I miss your father," she murmured. "He used to bring me up here when I could still walk, said this view could heal anything." Langston's grip tightened on the handles of her wheelchair. "Yeah, he said a lot of things." His tone was clipped bitter. He could still see his father's shadow in everything. The old man's hands teaching him to shave the half-empty whiskey glass left on the porch the night he never came back. Coraline didn't notice the bitterness in his voice. She was lost in memory. "You were just 6 when he left," she said gently. "But you still remember, don't you?" "I remember," Langston said, his voice almost a whisper. The path curved upward, and the trees began to thin, revealing the raw edge of the cliff ahead. He could already hear the river below crashing like the sound of judgment. His pulse quickened. Coraline adjusted her shawl, breathing shallow. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Work trouble again?" Langston didn't answer. His jaw flexed. "You don't have to carry everything alone, baby," she said softly. "God still provides." He laughed under his breath, a dry, humorless sound. "God's late, Ma." The silence that followed was heavy. A hawk cried somewhere in the distance. The sound made Coraline look up, smiling faintly. "Your father loved that sound," she said. "Said it made him feel free." Langston's hands froze on the wheelchair for half a second. "You sound just like him sometimes," she added, unaware of the knife her words had become. "Always running, always searching for something that don't love you back." He swallowed hard, eyes darkening. She didn't mean to hurt him, but she did. Every word dug into the memory of that man who had walked away and left them with nothing but bills and broken promises. He took a slow breath and forced his hands steady again. "Maybe he had the right idea," he muttered. Coraline looked up at him, puzzled. "What's that supposed to mean?" But Langston didn't reply. The path ended where the ground gave way to open sky. They had reached the cliff. Wind tore at his coat and pushed against the chair. The valley stretched wide beneath them, endless and indifferent. Coraline sighed in wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I forgot how much I miss this place." Langston's heart pounded. He had dreamed of this moment for weeks, telling himself it was mercy that he'd give her peace she couldn't find in the hospital bed or the endless pills. "Ma," he said quietly, "you ever think about Dad after he left every day?" She answered, "But not with hate, son. Hate keeps you chained." He looked at her jaw, trembling. "You forgave him?" "Of course," she said simply. "If I didn't, I'd never have raised you right." Her smile was small, but steady, the kind of smile that had once healed every cut and fear. Langston turned away, staring into the valley. He couldn't bear that purity it made what he was about to do feel heavier. In his coat pocket, a folded deed waited. The money would come in a week, enough to clear his debts, enough to start over. He told himself it was fair. She wouldn't feel pain. He adjusted her blanket gently. "You cold a little," she said, "but the air feels clean." He nodded slowly. The wind picked up again, rattling the pebbles around his feet. A small sound broke the rhythm, soft paws crunching through frost. Zephyr, the old German shepherd, had been following them the entire way, silent, observant, his golden eyes sharp. Langston didn't notice. His focus was on the horizon, on the roar beneath. He took one slow step forward, then another, until the wheelchair's front wheels touched the lip of the cliff. Coraline looked up, confused by his stillness. "What are you doing, Langston?" she asked. He leaned close, his breath cold against her ear. "Nothing, Ma," he said softly. "Just giving you that peace you wanted." And though she didn't understand, something in her heart did. Her lips parted, ready to speak, but the wind swallowed her voice. In that instant, Langston felt something watching him. He turned slightly and caught a glimpse of Zephyr standing just behind the trees, ears-pricked gaze fixed on him like a warning. The world narrowed to wind and heartbeat. The cliff's edge seemed alive, trembling beneath Langston's shoes, as if nature itself recoiled from what he was about to do. He could taste iron in the air, could hear the river below, like a congregation murmuring prayers for a soul about to be lost. Coraline's breathing was slow, measured, trusting. She tilted her head back, slightly, eyes half closed, letting the sunlight brush against her wrinkled cheeks. "You're shaking, baby," she said softly. "You okay?" He didn't answer. His fingers hovered over the handles of the wheelchair, the leather warm from his grip. He'd imagined this moment to feel clean, almost peaceful, an act of mercy, cloaked as release. But now his heart pounded like fists on a locked door. The papers in his coat pocket suddenly felt heavy, soaked in shame. He bent down slightly, his lips near her ear. "You don't have to hurt anymore, Ma," he murmured. The words came out uneven, like they didn't belong to him. Coraline smiled faintly, mistaking his trembling for compassion. "You're a good son, Langston," she whispered. That broke something in him. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and pushed. The sound was soft at first. The squeak of metal wheels, the crunch of stone, and then the scream. Coraline's voice tore through the air, raw and piercing, before vanishing into the roar below. Her shawl flew upward like a white flag, before twisting into the wind and disappearing into mist. The sound of the river swallowed everything. Langston stood frozen, chest heaving, the smell of rain and stone burning in his lungs. He waited for silence to feel like peace, but it didn't. It felt like falling without end. He stared into the empty space where she had been trying to breathe through the weight in his chest. The wheelchair's echo faded into nothing, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves behind him. He didn't turn. He thought it was the wind. He told himself it was over, that no one saw, no one heard, no one would ever know. He crouched down, resting his hand on the ground for balance, and that was when he noticed the small glint of light by his foot. His mother's earring, a single pearl resting on the soil like a tear the earth refused to drink. He stared at it transfixed. For a moment, he thought of picking it up, pocketing it, pretending it meant something sentimental. Instead, he left it there, as if erasing it could erase the sound of her scream. The cold crept up his spine, and his fingers began to shake. "It's done," he whispered to himself. "It's done." He stood, straightened his coat, and brushed dirt from his sleeves. The ritual of pretending gave him something to hold on to. He pulled his phone from his pocket, flipping through screens to distract his mind. His reflection in the glass didn't look like him anymore. It looked like a stranger wearing his face. He turned away from the edge and exhaled long and heavy. But before he could take another step, something caught his eye. The chrome frame of the wheelchair lying twisted on the rocks below reflected sunlight in fractured flashes. In one of those flashes, just before the mist covered it, he saw something move, a flicker of gold and black. For a heartbeat, he thought it was his imagination. Then he looked up and froze. On the ridge above, just beyond the tree line, stood Zephyr. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell, his fur rippling in the wind. His gaze burned straight into Langston, silent but knowing. The world seemed to tilt under the weight of that stare. "Go home," Langston muttered under his breath, forcing a nervous laugh. But the dog didn't move. His ears were pricked, body still as a stone carved from loyalty itself. For the first time since he pushed, Langston felt truly seen, not by God, not by man, but by something that could never lie. He turned away, gripping his phone tighter, whispering to himself that it didn't matter. Dogs forget, dogs forgive. He'd tell the police later that she slipped. He'd cry, maybe even donate some of the insurance money to her church. He had the story rehearsed. Yet the sound of soft paws padding down the slope made his stomach twist. Zephyr was moving quiet, but deliberate, following his scent like a shadow of conscience. Langston took a step back from the edge, scanning the cliffside below. The valley looked endless, filled with churning fog. Somewhere down there, he told himself the current would take her far enough that she'd never be found. But doubt whispered otherwise. What if she'd caught a branch? What if the chair didn't break apart? What if she was still breathing? He swallowed the thought like poison, forcing himself to believe his own lie. The dog's bark shattered his focus. One short, sharp bark, enough to make him flinch. "Go home, Zephyr," he barked back, voice cracking. The shepherd stopped, head tilted, expression unreadable. Then came another bark, lower, longer, echoing through the valley. It didn't sound like a call for help. It sounded like a vow. Langston felt anger rise in his throat, unsteady and desperate. "You don't understand," he muttered, voice trembling. She was tired. She wanted peace. But even as he said it, his words wilted under the sound of the wind. He looked down again and saw nothing but mist. "It's over," he said again, more to himself than to the animal. He turned toward the trail, ready to leave, but every step felt heavier, slower, as though the ground resisted him. Behind him, Zephyr's barks grew louder, sharper, like a warning that no human language could match. Langston pressed forward, hands buried in his pockets, the pearl still gleaming behind him in the dirt. The forest swallowed the light, and with each step the sound of barking followed him like the rhythm of a truth that refused to die. The forest held its breath. The scream had ended, but the echo hung in the mist, like a wound that refused to close. Zephyr remained still on the ridge, head tilted, ears twitching toward the emptiness below. His world had changed in one sound. The man he once trusted, the one who fed him scraps from his dinner plate, had turned predator. The woman who had saved him as a pup, who had mended his broken paw with trembling hands, was gone beyond sight. But dogs do not think in words, they feel in truths. Zephyr felt one thing now: wrongness. It pulsed through his chest with every beat of his heart. He took a slow step forward, nose flaring as the wind shifted. Her scent still clung to the air, faint and distant, mixed with pine earth and fear. He knew she was somewhere below. He could smell life weak, fading, but still there. His instincts sharpened to a point. He looked down the slope, saw the broken twigs leading toward the cliff, and began to move slow, at first, then faster. Behind him, Langston stumbled down the trail toward his car, muttering half prayers and half lies under his breath, convincing himself that what he'd done was mercy. But Zephyr didn't care for mercy. He cared for what was real. His claws dug into the soil, kicking pebbles into the wind as he sprinted. Each movement was silent, but deliberate, like a soldier who understood mission over fear. The closer he got to the edge, the louder the river roared, a sound of chaos and consequence. When he reached the cliff's lip, he stopped, leaning forward, his eyes scanning the rocks below. The fog swirled thick, but between two cracks in the stone, a flicker of white cloth caught his attention. Her shawl tangled in a branch that jutted out from the cliffside. Beneath it, movement. Barely. A hand shifting, weak but alive. Zephyr barked once, sharp and clipped. The sound carried across the valley, bounced off stone, and returned to him like a command. His body tensed. He backed up a few steps, gauging the slope, and leapt down to a lower ledge, claws scraping against rough stone. The cold bit at his pads, but he didn't stop. He moved from ledge to ledge, following the smell of blood and lavender until he could see her clearly. Coraline hung halfway down the cliff. Her chair mangled the frame, caught on a dead pine root that grew sideways out of the rock face. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his claws on stone. "Z," she rasped the word, torn between disbelief and prayer. Zephyr barked again, tail-stiff ears forward. She tried to lift her hand, but it trembled and fell. "Good boy," she whispered, her lips cracking, "fine, help." Zephyr whined, pacing along the edge of the rock he stood on. There was no safe path down. He glanced upward, muscles trembling, the old leash still hanging loosely from his neck, like a symbol of the bond they had. He turned back towards the trail above. He could hear footsteps, Langston's boots crunching through frost, moving away faster, now fleeing. The man didn't look back. Zephyr's eyes narrowed, his body lowering into a crouch. For the first time in his life, he growled a deep, primal sound that came from somewhere beyond obedience. It was not rage, it was promise. The growl followed Langston into the trees, a warning carved into sound itself. Zephyr turned again toward the cliff ears, twitching as Coraline's faint cough reached him. He barked 3 times, short and fast, a pattern he'd used as a pup when he wanted her attention. The echoes carried farther than before, like the mountain itself was helping him speak. Somewhere across the valley, 2 distant hikers paused, looking up. But Zephyr didn't know that yet. He was focused on her, watching every breath, measuring every sound. Her lips moved again. "Z, my baby boy," she murmured, her voice barely more than wind. The word boy struck him in the chest like a heartbeat. He barked once more, lower this time, then backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving her. He needed help. He couldn't pull her up alone. The slope was too steep, the drop too deep. He turned and sprinted back toward the trail. The forest blurred around him, the scent of pine and earth guiding him like a map. His muscles burned, but he didn't stop. He reached the clearing near where Langston had stood minutes earlier. The earrings still lay there, glinting faintly in the dirt. Zephyr sniffed it once and then barked again, louder, as if calling to the ghosts of men who'd forgotten what love meant. The sound carried, birds startled from the trees, their wings slicing through the silence. Zephyr lifted his head high and howled, not the sound of mourning, but the sound of promise. The howl stretched down the valley, past the water, past the stones, until it reached human ears. The hikers froze. "Did you hear that?" Marla said, gripping Dean's arm. "That wasn't just a dog," Dean replied, scanning the ridge with binoculars. "That was something else." They began moving toward the sound, their steps hurried, their breaths clouding in the cold air. Back at the cliff, Zephyr was already descending again, finding a safer path. His paws slipped once, scraping against stone, but he caught himself and pressed on. He reached a narrow ledge just above where Coraline hung close enough to see her eyes again. Her breathing was shallower now, her lips blue. Zephyr barked softly, a sound of comfort. Coraline smiled weakly, tears glistening on her lashes. "My boy," she whispered. The branch beneath her creaked, bending slowly. Time was running thin. Zephyr pressed himself low to the ground, tail stiff, trying to gauge the distance. If he jumped, he could reach her, but there'd be no way back up. He stayed frozen, every instinct at war duty against survival. Above them, faint shouts began to echo from the far trail. The forest thundered with sound as Zephyr charged up the slope, his claws tearing at the frozen soil, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of his mother's shallow breaths below the cliff. Every part of him trembled with instinct. Protect, pursue, punish. He had found her alive barely, and that meant one thing. The danger still existed, and it had a face. The dog's muscles burned with the urgency of knowing something in the world had gone wrong that only he could set right. Up ahead, Langston stumbled along the trail toward his car, muttering half-formed sentences, convincing himself the silence behind him meant she was gone. His shoes slipped on loose gravel. His breath came in gasps, but the lie in his mind was strong. He thought he had ended the suffering, tied off the burden, freed himself from a debt that life had forced on him. He did not hear the growl until it was too late. Zephyr burst through the brush like a shadow torn from the earth, his body a storm of fur and muscle. He hit Langston square in the chest, knocking him backward onto the dirt path. The man cried out, his back slamming into the ground, his phone flying from his grip and skidding across the trail. The growl that followed wasn't the sound of an animal. It was something older, something that didn't belong to this quiet valley. Langston raised an arm, blocking his face, eyes wide with disbelief. "Zephyr, no, get off me," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. But Zephyr didn't move. His paws pinned Langston's chest, his teeth bared just inches from the man's throat, his breath hot with the fury of truth. The dog's eyes burned like gold under the gray light. Langston stared into them and saw no confusion, no hesitation, only judgment. He froze, not because he feared the bite, but because he recognized something in that gaze. It was the same silent patience his mother had carried all her life, now stripped of forgiveness. Zephyr's growl deepened, rumbling through the air like the earth itself had learned how to speak. Langston's body trembled under the weight of that sound. He could smell the dog's breath, could feel the tremor in his chest with every heartbeat. "I had to," he gasped, his words trembling. "You don't understand," Zephyr snarled louder, pressing harder until Langston's breath came shallow. "She wanted peace," Langston stammered, desperate eyes darting toward his phone lying a few feet away. The screen glowed faintly with the message thread open. The last text sent less than an hour ago, transfer confirmed policy, active as of this morning. The words reflected off his pupils as he realized the evidence of his crime glared brighter than his guilt. The wind shifted. Zephyr's ears twitched, his gaze flicking briefly toward the sound of distant voices across the valley. The hikers were coming. The barks from earlier had reached them, and their footsteps were moving closer through the forest. Langston noticed too. "You hear that?" he hissed, seizing the moment. "Help's coming. You'll see I didn't mean to hurt her." He tried to push the dog off, but Zephyr shifted his weight muscles, locking like steel. The leash around his neck brushed Langston's arm, and the man grabbed at it instinctively. Zephyr lunged forward, teeth snapping an inch from his face, the sound cutting through the air like thunder. Langston froze again, breathing ragged. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. "She's dead," he whispered. "She's dead, and now you're gonna—" He didn't finish. Zephyr stepped back suddenly, his ears pricking toward the cliff. The sound had changed. A faint voice carried upward through the wind, broken but alive. "Z." The single syllable reached both of them. Langston went still, color draining from his face. "No," he said, softly, shaking his head. "No, that's not possible." Zephyr turned sharply, bolting toward the sound. Langston scrambled to his feet, grabbing his fallen phone. His hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped it again. The insurance text still glowed on screen, mocking him. He shoved it into his pocket, his mind spinning. "She can't be alive," he muttered. "She can't." But the voice came again, faint pleading carried by the wind like a prayer that refused to die. Z. The guilt hit him harder than any blow could have. He turned toward the cliff, stumbling through branches, following the sound, despite every instinct, screaming to run. Zephyr was already ahead of him, barking again, the bark sharp, urgent, commanding. The dog reached the edge and peered down his body, trembling with adrenaline. Coraline was still there, her hands gripping the broken root, her face pale as ash, but her eyes open. "Hold on," Langston shouted before realizing how meaningless his words sounded. Zephyr looked at him, once low growl still in his throat, then looked back down at her. For one brief moment, they stood side by side, the betrayer and the witness, the killer and the guardian, both staring into the same abyss that refused to claim her. Langston took a hesitant step closer, his mind splintering. "I can fix this," he said aloud, though even he didn't believe it. He dropped to his knees near the edge, reaching for a branch to pull her up. "I didn't mean to." His words broke when Coraline looked up at him. Even from that distance, her gaze found his calm, steady without hatred. "Langston," she said weakly, "please, don't let go again." He froze, paralyzed by the weight of her forgiveness. Behind him, Zephyr growled low, uncertain if mercy was what she wanted or what she feared. Langston reached down farther, his fingers trembling as he gripped the rope of vines near her hand. The dead pine creaked under her weight. The branch snapped slightly, sending a rain of dirt into the river below. "Hold on," he shouted, panic slicing through his chest. Zephyr barked again, standing at the edge, his eyes darting between them, his instincts torn. Then suddenly, Langston's phone slipped from his pocket, landing face up on the dirt. The screen lit up once more with that damning message, insurance confirmation, Coraline Hale policy verified. He saw it and knew. Everything was already over. The sound of sirens echoed faintly from the valley. Someone had called rescue. The mountain was no longer quiet. Zephyr stepped closer, his front paws almost touching the edge. Langston turned to look at him, eyes wide, sweat cold on his forehead. "You think they'll believe a dog?" he whispered. But Zephyr didn't move. He didn't need to. In the reflection of those eyes, Langston saw the truth of what he'd done more clearly than any courtroom ever could. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of them moved. The wind howled. The branch holding Coraline cracked again. And then Zephyr barked once loud, commanding the sound of judgment. The wind roared so loudly that words felt useless. The valley below swallowed every sound except for the desperate rhythm of Langston's breathing and Zephyr's relentless barking. Each bark cut through the storm like a flare shot toward heaven, a sound that refused to die, a sound that carried both fury and faith. Langston's fingers were raw from clutching the vines that looped around his mother's chair, his nails digging into bark that tore against his skin. His mind, usually so full of self-preservation and excuses, had gone quiet, replaced by a single thought beating like a drum. She's still alive. He couldn't stop seeing her face, couldn't stop hearing her voice saying his name with that mixture of love and warning that only mothers could make sound like prayer. "Hold on," he shouted again, though the wind nearly ripped the words away. Coraline's lips moved, whispering something he couldn't hear. Her knuckles were white against the branch that held her weight. Her frail arms trembled, her eyes half open. She had stopped screaming. It terrified him more than anything. Zephyr barked once, sharp commanding, and leaned forward, his teeth sinking into the frayed end of the rope that dangled near the cliff's edge. He tugged backward muscles, straining his paws, sliding in the loose dirt. Langston saw him and froze in disbelief. The dog's body shook with the effort, his growl low and constant, his chest heaving. "No," Langston said breathlessly, "you'll fall." But Zephyr didn't listen. He pulled harder, anchoring himself, as if the very earth had fused his paws to it. Langston turned back to the cliff, his hands shaking as he adjusted his grip on the vines. "Come on, Ma," he muttered. "Don't do this to me. Please." The irony burned his throat. He had taken her here to die, and now he was begging her to live. The rope creaked. The vines snapped one by one like ribs breaking under pressure. The branch holding the chair trembled, shedding splinters that vanished into the mist below. "Z?" Coraline's voice came faintly thin and broken, but alive. Langston looked down, eyes wide. "I'm here, Ma, don't let go." His voice cracked mid-word. It was the first time in years he'd called her Ma without anger behind it. Zephyr's jaws tightened, his teeth grinding against the rope fibers. Blood trickled from his gums, staining the frayed threads red. He didn't let go. He wouldn't. Somewhere across the valley, the hikers were shouting again, trying to follow the echoes of his barking. But the canyon played tricks on sound. It twisted and bent every call, sending them scrambling up the wrong side. Marla cupped her hands around her mouth. "Keep barking," she yelled into the wind. Dean pointed toward the opposite slope. "That dog's somewhere over there. It's bouncing off the ridge." They didn't know they were climbing away from the danger, not toward it. Back at the cliff, the storm thickened. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, stinging against Langston's face. His hands slipped once, nearly losing grip. Coraline cried out, her body jolting downward a few inches. The sound snapped something inside him. "No," he screamed, his voice raw. He dropped to his knees, leaning over the edge, stretching farther than was safe. Zephyr growled louder, pulling the rope tighter. Langston's mind flashed through everything he'd destroyed: her house, her peace, her trust, and he felt the full weight of it pressing on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said, through clenched teeth, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, Ma. Please, just give me one more chance." His tears mixed with rain falling into the abyss. Coraline looked up at him, her expression soft despite the terror. "Langston," she whispered, "you came back." The rope shuddered, the last vine snapping halfway through. Zephyr whimpered, shifting his grip, blood dripping from his mouth. He pulled again, harder this time, the sound of his strained breathing lost in the storm. Langston glanced back at him, his chest tightening. "Come on, boy. Don't stop now." The storm answered with thunder, deep and rolling, echoing across the cliffs. The last of the rope fibers began to split. Langston reached down as far as he could, his fingertips brushing her sleeve. "Grab me, Ma," he shouted. She lifted her hand weakly, her palm small and shaking. Their hands touched for half a second before the branch beneath her snapped completely. Coraline dropped with a scream, but the fall didn't come. The rope went taut, jerking violently, and Zephyr's body flew forward, slamming onto his belly as his teeth locked around the rope again. His claws tore trenches in the earth, his body trembling as he held on, anchoring her weight through nothing but will. Langston lunged and seized the rope with both hands, pulling back the muscles in his arms, screaming. "Hold him, boy. Hold him," he yelled, his voice barely human now. Zephyr growled low, and guttural eyes locked on Langston as if telling him that this time he wouldn't fail her. Together, man and beast pulled inch by inch through mud and blood and wind until the sound of sirens began to pierce the valley air. The rescuers had found the right path at last. Ropes dropped from the ridge above, and voices shouted commands. "We see her, she's alive. Don't move." Langston looked up, soaked, shaking eyes wild. Zephyr didn't stop until Coraline's body was within arm's reach of the rescuers. As hands reached down to grab her, he finally released the rope, panting hard, collapsing into the dirt. His body trembled, his jaws sore and bleeding. Langston crawled toward him, staring in disbelief. The dog's fur was matted with rain. His eyes half closed, but he lifted his head when Coraline's voice came again. "My boy." She whispered the words soft and fragile. It wasn't clear if she meant Langston or Zephyr, but both heard it, and both froze. The rescuers pulled her up onto the ledge, wrapping her in blankets. Her breathing was faint, but steady. Langston fell backward, gasping for air, his arms covered in scratches, his mind numb. He looked at Zephyr, who lay trembling, chest still rising. "You saved her," he muttered. The words came out hollow, broken by guilt. Zephyr blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the horizon. His job wasn't finished. His eyes still searched for threats, still guarded her even as his body began to give out. The rescuers called for a stretcher, their voices echoing through the valley. "She's alive! She's breathing!" someone shouted. Langston laughed weakly, almost hysterically, clutching his face in his hands. "Alive," he repeated like it was both a blessing and a sentence. The sound of the storm began to fade into the steady thrum of rotor blades as the helicopter approached the valley. Red and blue lights shimmered faintly through the mist, reflections of urgency scattered across wet rock and trembling trees. The air reeked of diesel rain and fear. Langston sat in the mud near the cliff's edge, his mother's blood still on his hands, his coat heavy with water. He didn't shiver. He couldn't. Every sense in him had gone numb. The rescuers were shouting instructions into radios, ropes unraveling like veins into the deep, their helmets glinting under the beam of the searchlight. Zephyr lay next to Coraline's stretcher, drenched, trembling, one paw resting against her blanket. Every few seconds, he lifted his head and scanned the aeriers' twitching eyes, restless. The storm had passed, but the world still shook. The two hikers, Marla and Dean, finally stumbled through the brush, their boots caked with mud, their faces streaked with disbelief. "We came from the wrong side," Marla said breathlessly, collapsing near a tree. "The echo, it led us the opposite way." Dean nodded, his chest heaving. "Did the dog do this? Did he find her?" One of the rescuers pointed to Zephyr. He held the rope in his mouth. Never let go. She'd have fallen if he hadn't. The words didn't feel real when spoken aloud, as though no human language could contain the purity of what had just happened. Langston looked up, eyes hollow. He watched Zephyr, but didn't dare go near him. The dog's fur was slick with blood, and Rain, his jaw swollen from strain, but his gaze never left Coraline. The sight pierced Langston deeper than guilt ever could. He whispered, he saved her like it was both confession and curse. Above them, the helicopter's blades cut through clouds, scattering mist like shattered glass. The downdraft pushed the rescuers back their jackets, flapping ropes swinging wildly. Coraline's stretcher rose slowly, guided by steady hands and quiet prayers. Zephyr barked once the sound small against the roar of the machine. It wasn't a cry, it was a question, a call for reassurance that she would come back to him. Coraline stirred slightly, her hand twitching beneath the blanket. Zephyr pressed his nose to her fingers, feeling the faint vibration of her pulse. He couldn't hear her anymore. The helicopter's engine had flooded his world with white noise, but he could still feel her warmth, and that was enough. Langston shielded his face from the debris, squinting through the chaos. He saw his mother's frail body rising through the air, spinning slightly on the cable. The floodlight painted her in gold against the storm-dark sky, and for one moment she looked like forgiveness itself, fragile, bright, untouchable. He wanted to call out to tell her he was sorry, but his voice caught in his throat. Words had lost their meaning. Only action could matter now. Zephyr stood, suddenly shaking water from his coat, his body stiff despite exhaustion. He barked again, hoarse and broken, the sound trailing into a whine. Marla stepped forward, laying a hand on his back. "Easy, boy," she said softly, but Zephyr didn't move. He watched the helicopter ascend, his eyes locked on the single point of light, carrying the only person who had ever loved him without condition. When the stretcher vanished into the clouds, he sat down heavily, head low, tail still. For the first time, he looked small, not from weakness, but from the weight of devotion. Dean crouched nearby, whispering, "He's deaf now, isn't he, from the noise?" The rescuer nodded, maybe for a while, maybe forever. Langston's breath hitched. He didn't deserve to feel anything for the dog, but the truth crushed him anyway. Zephyr had given more to save her than he ever had in his entire life. He rose slowly, his legs trembling, and walked toward the animal. The rescuers stiffened, watching, but he didn't approach with threat, only with guilt heavy enough to drown a man. "Hey," he whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean..." Zephyr turned his head toward him, one ear flicking eyes narrow and unreadable. Langston dropped to his knees in the mud, his coat dragging his words stumbling out. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You didn't just save her. You saved what little was left of me, too." Zephyr blinked once, slow, deliberate, and then turned back toward the cliff where the helicopter lights still flickered above. He didn't growl. He didn't move closer. His silence was louder than any snarl. Langston reached into his pocket, pulling out the crumpled earring, the pearl that had fallen before the push. He stared at it at how absurdly small it looked against his blood-stained palm. He placed it on the ground between them and whispered, "That's all I've got left of her right now." Zephyr didn't respond, but his gaze flicked briefly toward the pearl before drifting back to the sky. Rain began again, soft and thin, washing over the both of them. The rescuers moved with efficiency, securing the ropes, gathering equipment. Marla and Dean offered their help, their voices gentle, hesitant, unsure how to exist in the space between miracle and crime. A medic approached Langston with a flashlight. "Sir, we need to take you in for questioning," the man said. Langston nodded numbly. "Yeah," he murmured. "I figured." He stood slowly, his body heavy, his soul heavier. As the medic guided him towards the vehicles, Zephyr stayed where he was, motionless, eyes still trained upward. The helicopter had disappeared beyond the ridge, but the low hum of its engines still vibrated faintly through the clouds. Zephyr tilted his head, as though listening for her heartbeat in the sky. Coraline was alive. He knew that, not because he could hear it, but because he could feel it the same way animals sense storms or tremors before humans ever notice. His tail moved once, a small, tired flick. As the rescue team began their descent toward the road, Dean lingered, turning back to watch Zephyr one last time. The dog stood on the cliff's edge, silhouetted against the dawn, breaking through the fog, his figure unmoving, carved in loyalty. "He's not leaving her," Dean said softly. "He doesn't believe it's over." Marla nodded, her eyes glistening. For him, it's never over. The light grew stronger, washing the valley in gold. Langston was led into the ambulance, his wrists loosely cuffed, his head bowed. He didn't fight. Through the window, he caught one last glimpse of Zephyr, still standing where he had been since the fall. The door shut, sealing him inside, the siren starting its mournful wail. Back at the cliff, Zephyr finally lay down, lowering his head onto his paws. The sound of the helicopter's retreat had barely faded when the wind changed again, rising in a sudden gust that howled through the valley like a living thing. The air pressure dropped, the clouds above thickened, and just as the rescue crew began to relax, the pilot's panicked voice crackled through the radio. "We're losing lift, the rope's twisting." The stretcher carrying Coraline jolted violently mid-air, spinning in the gust. The rescuers below froze, hands gripping the safety lines, eyes wide as the cable whipped and strained. Langston, who had been sitting silent in the ambulance, lifted his head at the sound. He knew that tone the universe wasn't done punishing him yet. The pilot's voice came again, sharp and urgent. "We can't stabilize. We're lowering back down. Repeat, lowering her down." The medics outside the vehicle rushed back to the ridge, shouting orders over the static. Langston shoved the paramedic aside, stumbling out into the rain. His eyes locked on the sky, where the shape of the stretcher swung helplessly against the gray. The rope unraveled slowly, lowering her back toward the same earth that had betrayed her once already. Zephyr, still lying at the cliff's edge, rose instantly. He could no longer hear, but he could feel the shift in the wind, could sense the vibration of danger through his paws. His head snapped upward, body coiled. The helicopter dipped slightly, its tail rotor spinning against the turbulence. The crew lowered Coraline as fast as they dared, their voices frantic. Langston ran forward, his boots slipping in the mud, his arms outstretched. "Bring her down here," he yelled, waving, though the wind tore his voice away. He fell once, scraping his palms raw, but pushed himself up again. His chest burned, his lungs rasping with every breath. The rope descended the stretcher, swinging wildly. Zephyr ran to meet it, barking silently, his voice long gone but his body screaming with motion. When Coraline touched ground again, the rescuers rushed to stabilize the stretcher. Their faces pale, pulse weak but steady. One of them called out, "We're grounding her until the wind's clear." Langston knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he brushed rain from her forehead. Her eyelids fluttered open slightly. "Ma," he whispered, his throat closing on the word. "You're okay. You're safe." But she didn't answer. Her gaze drifted past him toward Zephyr, who had pressed his body against the side of the stretcher tail, still eyes locked on her face. Coraline's lips parted, a faint sound escaping. "Z." She breathed, her hand twitching toward the dog. Langston swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay. He wanted to reach for her hand, but shame rooted him in place. The medics began adjusting the straps, wrapping her in more blankets. One of them looked at him warily. "You her son Langston," nodded, voice barely audible. "Yeah," he said. "I'm the son." The words tasted like rust. Behind him, Zephyr's body trembled. He pressed his nose to Coraline's wrist, feeling the faint thrum of her pulse. She opened her eyes wider, searching for something. Her gaze found Langston's face, wet, broken, terrified, and her fingers moved weakly until they brushed his hand. He flinched. Her grip, though faint, was deliberate. "Don't run," she whispered. Her voice was cracked brittle, but it struck him harder than any accusation. His head bowed, rain dripping from his chin. "I won't," he said. "I swear." She squeezed his hand once, then let it fall. The medic leaned over her, checking her breathing. "We'll have to wait 10 minutes for another chopper," he said. "Winds are too strong." Langston didn't respond. He just stared at her face, memorizing the lines, the exhaustion, the quiet strength that refused to die even when everything else had. Zephyr lay down again, his head on her lap, eyes never closing. The rain began to ease, falling softer, the storm surrendering its rage to exhaustion. A low hum of distant thunder rolled through the valley, echoing like a fading heartbeat. For a brief moment, it seemed the world itself paused to listen. Langston's chest tightened. "Ma," he said softly, his voice trembling, "why did you still grab me?" After everything, Coraline's lips curved slightly, the faintest trace of a smile. "Because you're my son," she murmured, "and I won't let you disappear twice." He turned away, his vision blurring, his breath shaking. Every word she spoke was forgiveness he didn't deserve. Zephyr lifted his head slightly, pressing his nose against Langston's arm. The contact startled him. He looked down at the dog, meeting those amber eyes that no longer reflected sound, but still burned with understanding. He reached out slowly, touching the side of Zephyr's face. "You should hate me too," he whispered. Zephyr blinked, unmoving, then turned back toward Coraline, resting his head on her chest. The simplicity of that act undid him completely. Langston collapsed forward, his forehead touching the ground beside the stretcher, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rescuers exchanged glances, but said nothing. They understood without asking. One of them touched his shoulder lightly. "She's strong," the man said quietly. "Stronger than most." Langston nodded without looking up. "She always was," he said. Above them, the helicopter began circling back its engine, thundering faintly through the thinning mist. The pilot's voice came again, through static winds clearing, preparing second lift. The rescuers began fastening new straps, checking every line twice. Langston stood shakily, stepping back to give them room. Zephyr didn't move until Coraline's hand brushed his head again. "Stay," she whispered, her breath shallow. "You've done enough." But Zephyr refused to obey. He stood as the stretcher began to rise again, following every inch of the lift, his gaze fixed on her, as though the air itself might betray her again. Langston watched him, his throat tightening. "He doesn't trust me," he said quietly. One rescuer replied without turning. "You wouldn't either." The words hit like truth, shaped as mercy. The stretcher ascended once more, slower this time, steady under the clear sky. The clouds had broken at last, revealing the bruised colors of dawn spreading across the horizon. Langston looked up, following her shape until it vanished into the light. Zephyr stood beside him, unmoving, his chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm. For a long moment, neither of them breathed a word or a sound. The storm was over, but its echo remained between them. Langston turned toward the dog. "She saved me too, you know," he said softly. "I just didn't know it until she fell." Zephyr blinked once, then turned his head toward the rising sun. The hospital lights were too bright for a dawn that should have felt like salvation. Machines hummed in rhythm with Coraline's heart, the slow, stubborn beat of a body that refused to surrender even after betrayal. The sterile air smelled of antiseptic and rain carried in from the storm. Langston sat in the hallway outside her room, still in the same mud-soaked clothes, hands trembling as if the dirt of the cliff had found a way into his bones. The police officer standing nearby watched him with the kind of silence that only follows truth waiting to be said. Zephyr lay at the end of the hallway, beside the door, eyes half closed but never fully asleep, his fur cleaned by the nurses, but his spirit still coiled like a spring. He had followed the ambulance all the way here, whining when they tried to keep him outside, until the nurse relented. Even without hearing, he sensed everything: the tension, the scent of fear, the static of guilt. Inside the room, Coraline stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, until the world came back into shape. The beeping monitor, the white walls, the faint vibration of Zephyr's breathing just beyond the doorway. A detective in a tan coat stood beside her bed, notebook-ready, voice low and patient. "Mrs. Hale, can you tell me what happened on the cliff?" he asked softly. Her eyes flickered, remembering. The air seemed to thicken. Her throat tightened, every breath a labor. "It was my son," she whispered finally. The detective looked down his pen, hesitating over the paper. "Langston Hale?" he asked gently. Coraline's lips trembled. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "He pushed me." The words hung between them, fragile but unbreakable. The detective nodded slowly. "We'll have to speak to him," he said, closing the notebook. But before he could leave, Coraline's hand rose weakly. "Wait," she murmured, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Let him talk first. Please. Don't take him away until he's spoken." The detective hesitated, but nodded. "I'll give you a few minutes," he said, then stepped outside, signaling to the officer. The door clicked shut behind him. The hallway fell into the kind of silence that screams louder than sound. Langston looked up from where he sat, his eyes hollow but alert. "She's awake?" he asked. The officer nodded once. "She asked for you." Langston's heart kicked against his ribs. He stood slowly, his knees stiff, and walked toward the door. Zephyr lifted his head as he passed, tail unmoving, gaze steady. Langston paused, looking down at him. "You'll let me through," he whispered. Zephyr blinked once, then shifted slightly to the side, not in forgiveness, but in allowance. Langston took a breath and stepped into the room. The air felt colder, here thinner. Coraline turned her head slightly toward him, her eyes tired but clear. "You came," she said softly. He nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her, wondering how she could look at him without hate. "They'll arrest me," he said finally. "You know that." "Yes," she whispered. "But before they do, tell me why." He laughed, once a hollow sound. "You really want to know why I tried to kill you?" She didn't flinch. "I want to know what part of you thought you had no other choice." The question cut deeper than accusation. He sank into the chair beside her, bed elbows, on his knees, hands clasped tightly. "It started with the bills," he said, his voice shaking. "Then the bank, then the calls that never stopped. Every day I looked at you and saw the weight I couldn't carry anymore. I told myself it wasn't your fault, but every time I looked at your medicine bottles, I hated you a little more for still being here." He swallowed hard, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I sold the house, the one Dad left. I told myself it was for us, But when I signed the papers, I knew it was only for me. Coraline's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. He continued, voice lower now. This morning I told myself I was giving you peace, that you'd forgive me if you could see what I was carrying. But when I pushed that chair and heard you scream, I knew I'd killed the last good thing I had left. The monitor beeped steadily, the sound almost like a metronome for his confession. He looked down at his hands, the dirt still under his nails. You should hate me, he said. You should have let me die out there instead. Coraline's lips curved faintly into a sad, tired smile. If I'd done that, she said then, what would become of the part of you that still knows this is wrong? He shook his head, tears streaming down now. I don't deserve you. Deserve has nothing to do with love, she said quietly. It never did. The door creaked open slightly. The detective peeked in but didn't interrupt. Zephyr stepped forward into the doorway, his paws silent against the floor. He moved slowly toward the bed, his tail low, his eyes shifting between them. Langston turned to look at him, expecting a snarl or a glare, but Zephyr did neither. He approached cautiously until he was beside Langston's chair, then sat down, pressing one paw against the man's knee. Langston froze. The weight of that paw was light, but the meaning behind it crushed him. Zephyr's gaze met his steady, unreadable, yet filled with something close to mercy. Coraline reached out her hand, touching Zephyr's head gently. He forgives faster than I do, she whispered. Langston let out a strangled laugh, then covered his face with his hands. I don't even know how to ask for that. Coraline's voice softened. You don't ask for forgiveness, baby. You live in a way that earns it back. The words sank into the sterile air like seeds into dry soil. The detective stepped fully into the room, now his expression grave, but not cruel. Mr. Hale, he said quietly, I'm going to need to take you with me. Langston nodded slowly. I know. He stood moving gently, so Zephyr's paw slipped off his knee. Before the officer could cuff him, he turned to his mother one last time. I'll do better, he said, his voice breaking. Even if I spend the rest of my life behind bars, I'll do better. Coraline smiled faintly. Then maybe this fall won't be the end of us, she said. Zephyr followed Langston to the door, his eyes tracking every step. The detective placed a hand on Langston's shoulder, guiding him toward the hallway. Just before they crossed the threshold, Zephyr brushed against Langston's leg, the briefest touch of fur, as if sealing something unspoken between them. Langston paused, swallowing hard, then looked down. Take care of her, he said softly. Zephyr didn't move. He didn't need to. His silence was the answer. When the door closed, Coraline exhaled deeply, her eyes drifting to the window where dawn had broken fully. The light spread across her blanket, soft and gold, washing away the gray of the night. Zephyr returned to her side, laying his head gently on her lap. She ran her fingers through his fur and whispered, "Good boy. You did what none of us could. You never gave up on love." Outside, the police car waited with its lights flashing, not as a punishment, but as the natural consequence of truth. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered long enough to remind them all that redemption begins not when the world forgives, but when the heart finally learns to see itself clearly. The courthouse smelled of paper rain and quiet judgment. Days had turned into weeks, and the storm that once raged over Black Ridge Cliff had become something smaller, but no less powerful, a storm inside the heart of a man learning to live with what he had done. Langston stood in front of the judge, his wrists no longer cuffed, but his hands clasped together tightly, as if invisible chains still held them. Coraline sat behind him in a wheelchair, a light blanket covering her legs, Zephyr at her side. The dog's coat gleamed again, though the fur around his muzzle still carried the faint pink stain of old blood. His ears twitched every time someone spoke, though he no longer heard the words. His loyalty, however, had not dulled with silence. The judge looked between mother and son. brow furrowed, tapping his pen against the stack of reports. "Mrs. Hale, he said you are aware that your son confessed to attempted murder, correct?" Coraline nodded, once her eyes steady. "Yes, Your Honor." And yet the judge continued, glancing at the letter in his hand. "You are asking for his sentence to be delayed so that he can act as a caretaker for your dog." Coraline smiled faintly, her voice calm. "Not just my dog, my witness, my protector, my reminder." The courtroom murmured, the sound like leaves rustling in a restless wind. Langston closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every stare pressing down on him. Coraline went on, her tone softer but firm. "Punishment doesn't grow people, love does. He needs to live with what he did not run from it behind bars." The judge leaned back, studying her, then glanced at Langston. "And you, Mr. Hale, what do you think of your mother's request?" Langston looked up slowly, his voice low but steady. "I think she's too good for me, sir, but if she believes I can earn what I lost, I'll try." The judge was silent for a moment. Finally, he sighed, set down the papers, and said, "The court grants a temporary deferment. You will serve under house arrest for 3 months while assisting your mother's recovery. After that, the final sentencing will be reviewed. Fail to comply, and the full term applies." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The sound echoed like a door closing and another opening somewhere unseen. Coraline reached down to touch Zephyr's head. The dog wagged his tail once, almost imperceptibly, as if understanding that duty had not yet ended. Outside the courthouse, the wind was gentle. Langston pushed his mother's wheelchair down the ramp slowly, the rhythmic squeak of its wheels the only sound between them. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "You just bought me time I don't deserve." Coraline smiled faintly. "Time is what grace gives son. What you do with it decides if it was wasted." Zephyr trotted beside them, occasionally glancing up, as if checking that both still breathed the same air. Back at the small apartment the court had assigned, the days began to unfold like pages of a new book, written in humility. Langston cooked breakfast each morning, burned the eggs more often than not, and learned to take care of wounds that didn't bleed anymore. Coraline's strength returned slowly, though she refused to let him push her wheelchair unless she was too tired to move. "You need to walk more than I do," she said, with a teasing smile one morning. Zephyr followed them everywhere, his paws soft against the floor, his body moving like a living metronome, marking their rhythm of survival. Langston had begun to talk to him as if he could still hear. "You miss her when she's asleep, don't you?" he'd whisper, late at night, sitting by the window. Zephyr would tilt his head, the movement slow, deliberate, as though memory still spoke louder than hearing. Sometimes Langston would wake in the middle of the night to find Zephyr sitting in front of Coraline's door, staring at it as if guarding her dreams. The sight unsettled him at first, then began to comfort him. The dog's patience became a mirror for his own learning to sit with guilt instead of fleeing from it. Days turned into weeks. The winter thawed into the first shy blush of spring. Coraline began taking short walks outside Zephyr's leash looped around her wrist, Langston following with quiet vigilance. People in the neighborhood watched them pass, some whispering, some waving. Coraline always waved back. "You can't undo what's been done," she told her son one afternoon as they sat by the park fountain. "But you can stop making new things to regret." He nodded, his gaze drifting to Zephyr, who was lying nearby with his chin resting on his paws. "I still see it sometimes," Langston said. "That moment, the push, her scream. I don't know if it'll ever leave me." Coraline placed her hand on his arm. "Maybe it shouldn't," she said. "It's the scar that keeps you from breaking again." That night, Langston couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, full of unspoken prayers. He sat in the living room, staring at the wheelchair near the window. The moonlight painted it silver, ghostly, almost alive. Zephyr lay beside it, head resting against one wheel. His eyes were open, glowing faintly in the light. Langston spoke into the stillness. "You remember that day, don't you?" "Every second. Zephyr didn't move. His ears twitched, his chest rising and falling slowly. Langston swallowed, his throat tightening. "You should hate me," he whispered, "but you still guard her like nothing happened." The dog blinked once slowly as if answering. Langston exhaled, shaking his head. "She thinks I can change," he said, "but sometimes I think she's wrong." Zephyr's tail moved, once a faint rustle against the floor, then stilled again. Langston stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "If she ever forgives me, I'll believe it's because you made her remember how to." The clock ticked softly, a fragile rhythm marking time that refused to stop. The next morning, Coraline awoke to find Langston cooking breakfast again, the smell of toast and coffee drifting through the small apartment. Zephyr sat near his feet, his nose twitching. "Smells better than yesterday," Coraline said, smiling as she wheeled herself into the kitchen. Langston laughed quietly. "That's because I didn't burn it." He placed the plate in front of her hands, steady for the first time in weeks. Zephyr sat between them, the quiet witness to something ordinary but sacred. Later that afternoon, Langston received a letter from the court confirming his review date. He read it silently, then folded it neatly and set it on the table. 3 weeks left, he said softly. Coraline nodded. 3 weeks to prove you can be the man I raised. That night, as he turned off the lights and checked the doors, he found Zephyr sitting in front of the wheelchair again, staring at it with a stillness that pierced the dark. Langston walked over, kneeling beside him. The morning of the final court review rose clear and golden, the first truly warm day since the storm. The world outside their small apartment glowed with the promise of spring. The air carried the scent of wet earth and distant blossoms, and the city felt almost kind for once. Langston stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the shirt that Coraline had pressed for him the night before. His hands were steady now, no longer trembling from guilt, though every movement still carried the gravity of a man trying to earn the right to move forward. His reflection looked older, not in years, but in honesty. Zephyr lay by the door, head on his paws, watching silently. Coraline's voice came from the kitchen light, but tired. "You're going to be late if you keep staring at yourself, baby." Langston smiled faintly. "Just making sure I look like someone worth forgiving," he said. She chuckled, a sound that filled the apartment with the warmth it had once lost. "You already do. But don't tell the judge I said that." He walked into the kitchen to find her sitting in her wheelchair, pouring tea with the slow care of someone who understood the value of small rituals. The sunlight through the window caught the silver in her hair, turning it to light. "You ready?" she asked. "More than I thought I'd ever be," he replied. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'll be back before lunch." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Walk slow," she said. "Fast feet make foolish choices." He nodded, grabbed his coat, and turned toward the door. Zephyr stood as if sensing the importance of the day. "Stay," Langston said softly, but the dog tilted his head, refusing the command. Coraline laughed quietly. "Let him go with you. Someone has to make sure you don't forget the truth." Langston hesitated, then nodded. "All right, old man, let's go." He opened the door, the leash dangling loosely from his hand. But as he turned back to wave one last time, he noticed Coraline's hand clutch the edge of the table. Her teacup fell shattering against the floor. "Ma," he said sharply. Her body slumped forward, her lips parting in a soft sigh. Langston dropped the leash and rushed to her side. "Ma, stay with me, please." Her head rested against his arm, her breathing shallow but present. Panic rose in him like fire. He looked toward the phone, grabbed it, and dialed emergency services, his voice shaking as he gave the address. "Please hurry," he said. "She's not breathing right." Zephyr stood beside him, whining softly, pressing his head against Coraline's arm, as if trying to wake her. Langston looked at the clock, 8:35 a.m. The court session was at 9. He glanced at her face, pale but calm, then at the door. For a moment, the choice tore him in two directions, the law that could free him and the love that had already saved him. His pulse hammered in his ears. No, he whispered more to himself than to anyone. I'm not leaving again. He stayed. He held her hand, stroked her hair, whispered prayers half remembered from childhood. Don't go yet, Ma. Please don't go. Zephyr circled once, then sat beside him, his eyes never leaving her. Minutes passed before the sirens arrived. Paramedics rushed in, moving with quick precision, checking vitals, asking questions. Langston answered in short bursts, his voice steady but low. She just collapsed. She's breathing, but it's weak. The older medic looked up. You did the right thing calling us. Langston shook his head. I should have done a lot of things right a long time ago. They lifted Coraline carefully, securing her on a stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy but aware. Langston, she murmured. He leaned close, squeezing her hand. I'm here, Ma. Her voice was barely a whisper. You have court. He laughed softly, the sound breaking under emotion. You're all that matters. She shook her head slightly, her breath trembling. No, son, go. Let them see the man you've become. Don't waste the mercy we fought for. The paramedic nodded toward the clock. We'll take good care of her. You can follow us after. Langston hesitated, torn between duty and devotion. Then Zephyr nudged his leg, a firm, deliberate push that made him look down. The dog's eyes met his steady, calm, commanding. It was as if Zephyr were saying, She's right, go finish this. Langston exhaled slowly, then leaned down, kissed Coraline's forehead once more. I'll make you proud, he whispered. Her lips curved faintly. You already did. He stepped back as they wheeled her out, watching until the ambulance doors closed. Zephyr looked up at him, leash still hanging loose, tail still. All right, Langston said, voice quiet. Let's go finish what we started. The courthouse was only 10 blocks away, but it felt like miles. The city buzzed around them, indifferent and alive. Zephyr trotted beside him, keeping perfect pace. People turned to look, the tall man in a worn gray coat, walking with a German shepherd, whose eyes seemed carved from truth. When they reached the steps, the same detective who had arrested him weeks before stood waiting by the door. You're late, he said flatly. Langston nodded. I know, my mother collapsed. The detective's expression softened slightly. Is she alive? Langston said. And she told me to come. The man nodded once, gesturing toward the courtroom. Then let's not keep her faith waiting. Inside, the judge looked up as they entered. Langston stood tall, Zephyr sitting quietly by his side. Mr. Hale, the judge said, surprised. You brought the dog? Langston nodded. He's the one who saw everything, Your Honor. I figured he should be here to see this too. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the room, but the judge's face remained serious. You understand the terms of your review. I do, Sir, Langston said. But before you decide anything, I need to say something. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Langston took a breath. I can't undo what I did. I can't erase the pain I caused. But I can live in a way that honors the one person who refused to stop believing I could change. My mother told me redemption isn't about being forgiven. It's about learning how to love the right way every day until it stops hurting to do it. So that's what I'll do whether I'm free or not. The room went silent. Even the bailiff looked down, blinking hard. The judge leaned back, studying him. You've learned more in these months than some men learn in a lifetime, he said quietly. The law will do its part, but it seems life has already given you the harder sentence. He glanced down at the papers, then set them aside. Mr. Hale, your probation is extended for 1 year under supervision. Stay clean, stay true, and this case will close without imprisonment. Langston's breath caught. Thank you, Your Honor. The gavel struck once firm, but not harsh. Zephyr rose, tail wagging, once slow and steady. As they walked out of the courtroom, the detective called after him, She'll be proud. Langston nodded. She already is. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting the city in light. The ambulance was gone, but he knew where it had gone, to the same hospital that had seen both his sin and his salvation. He turned toward that direction, Zephyr walking beside him. For the first time, his steps didn't feel heavy. They felt earned. He reached down, brushing his hand over Zephyr's head. "We're going home," he said. The dog looked up his eyes, reflecting the bright sky. They walked the long road in silence, man and dog, bound by love that had once been broken and rebuilt. Somewhere far ahead, a future waited, not free from consequence, but rich with purpose. The world moved on, but their story remained quiet and eternal, written in every footstep. Because sometimes grace doesn't erase the past, it just teaches you how to live differently with its weight. The end. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe so more people can hear it too. Tell me in the comments what part of this story hit you hardest and where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to read your thoughts below.